How a nation welcomes foreign leaders is not only a matter of ceremony, but also a reflection of strategic priorities. Under President Donald Trump, the way the United States received Russian President Vladimir Putin and European leaders clearly revealed how America evaluated each partner. The closed-door meeting in Alaska with Putin subtly signaled that Russia was a strategic rival requiring cautious dialogue, while the public reception of European leaders hosted by lower-ranking officials emphasized transparency, but also showed that America did not place them on the same level. This difference influenced discussions, alliances, and how the world perceived America's position. According to assessments by many international observers, Donald Trump's reception of Russian President Vladimir Putin and European leaders was not merely diplomatic protocol, but also a clear reflection of Washington's strategic priorities. With Russia, the meeting was held in Anchorage, Alaska, inside a military base with strict security. Both sides had private time to exchange views before appearing before the press. Analysts saw this as a powerful symbol. The United States considered Russia a strategic partner requiring direct and discreet conversations instead of just public rituals. In contrast, the reception of European leaders was entirely different. The President of France or the Chancellor of Germany were not personally welcomed by Trump, but usually greeted by lower-ranking officials. The meetings were held openly with large media participation. This arrangement was viewed as a message the United States wanted to stress transparency, but it also subtly suggested that Europe was not a top priority in Washington's strategic calculations. This difference was also reflected in the content of the discussions. With Russia, closed talks opened opportunities to delve into key issues such as security or the situation in Ukraine. In contrast with Europe, the meetings leaned toward imagery and political messaging with little connection to specific strategic agreements. Some Western articles argued that Trump's approach undermined trust between Washington and its democratic European allies. The gap in reception became a symbol of strategic uncertainty as America prioritized closed exchanges with Russia while appearing unclear in its relations with the European Union and NATO. The international community also viewed this move as a signal that the United States was willing to make concessions in private dialogue channels with great powers like Russia to secure its own interests while leaving Europe in a secondary position. This could encourage other nations such as China or India to develop their own diplomatic channels to balance influence. From the differences in reception-style discussion, content, and diplomatic impact, it is clear that Trump wanted to send a strong message. Russia was seen as a strategic partner requiring discreet engagement, while Europe, though a traditional ally, mainly played a supporting role in imagery and politics, rather than being placed on the same level in global strategic decision-making. The relationship between the United States and Russia is often shaped by the contrast between openness and secrecy. While with Western allies, Washington tends to emphasize transparency with Moscow, the channels of exchange are usually closed. Some experts believe this approach stems from the reality that issues between the United States and Russia, such as nuclear arms control, energy security, or the war in Ukraine, are all sensitive matters difficult to negotiate publicly. In addition, many international analysts argue that maintaining secrecy also gives the United States and Russia strategic space. Both sides can have frank discussions, including controversial proposals, without the immediate reactions of public opinion. This is something meetings with Europe can hardly achieve, since most take place under the spotlight of the media and must comply with the European Union's principle of transparency. However, this discretion also produces consequences. In Europe, many politicians and scholars worry that Washington granting Moscow a separate channel of contact could undermine the strategic trust of allies. Some European editorials even warned that a US-Russia model of secret agreements leaving Europe outside could create the feeling of being sidelined and weaken solidarity within NATO. Several Eastern European experts further emphasize that this difference inadvertently handed Russia a major advantage in terms of image. When granted private dialogue with the United States, Moscow could assert itself as an equal great power, thereby enhancing both domestic and international prestige. By contrast, Europe was placed in the position of being both an ally and merely an observer of substantive agreements. In the long run, this approach could reinforce the perception that America uses a double message, on the one hand affirming commitment to European allies through public meetings, while on the other maintaining discreet channels with Russia to address strategic issues that cannot be brought to the public. This made the United States more flexible, but it also created a trust gap that rivals could exploit to divide transatlantic relations. Some international relations experts argue that the difference in Donald Trump's behavior stemmed from his assessment of the actual power of his partners. Russia, with the largest nuclear arsenal in the world and its permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council, was viewed by Trump as a peer strategic rival. In Washington's eyes, no global security crisis, whether arms control, energy, or Ukraine, could ignore Moscow. For that reason, Trump's priority for discreet dialogue channels with Russia was seen by many observers as recognition of the power seat Russia still held in the international system. In contrast, Europe, despite its collective economic strength and central role in NATO, was judged by Trump to be in a different position. European nations relied heavily on U.S. security protection within NATO, while they themselves often disagreed internally over defense and foreign policy. Moreover, Trump repeatedly and publicly criticized NATO countries for not spending the required 2% of GDP on defense, calling it a burden for America. This led him to keep a certain distance from Europe, both to highlight the asymmetric relationship and to send a political message to domestic voters that the United States would not suffer losses for allies. For Europe, Trump's public criticism of NATO allies not contributing enough to defense budgets was seen as an effective political tool. It allowed him to send the message that America no longer had to carry the burden of security for other nations. Although this approach caused dissatisfaction in Europe, many American voters saw it as a sign of a tough leader who defended the country's economic and military interests. Meanwhile, with Russia, Trump chose to maintain discreet channels of dialogue, thereby shaping his own image as the only one capable of controlling or negotiating with one of America's most dangerous rivals. According to many observers, this was not only a foreign policy calculation, but also an electoral strategy emphasizing his personal ability to handle vital security issues better than his opponents, thereby gaining political advantage at home. Peace for Ukraine is now seen by many experts as a complicated puzzle not only rooted in the conflict between Kiev and Moscow, but also reflecting Washington's global strategy. Some analyses suggest that the United States is reapplying an old formula in foreign policy, being ready to make controlled concessions to a great power in exchange for greater benefits for itself. In history, there were similar examples. Many observers compare the current situation to U.S. policy in the 1970s, when Washington opened the door for China to join the international arena. In return, the United States gained an important counterbalance to the Soviet Union during the Cold War. That move showed that Washington could sacrifice certain local interests to achieve long-term strategic goals. In the present context, the risk is that Kyiv might have to concede part of its territory, for example Crimea, which has already been under Russia's de facto control, or some regions in the east in order to secure a peace agreement. However, such a scenario could leave behind long-term strategic vulnerabilities because the existence of unresolved territorial disputes would mean Ukraine could always be used by other great powers as a bargaining chip. Experts warn that peace based on land concessions is often unsustainable since the root conflict remains and may erupt again at any moment. Analyses from many Western sources also suggest that the United States will continue to place its national interests above all. Relations with Russia are seen as the next priority since Moscow is a strategic rival with great influence over global security. Only after that come Europe and NATO, important allies, but not at the center of Washington's calculations. In this order, Ukraine is often pushed to the bottom, a necessary partner for the United States to maintain influence in Eastern Europe, but not strong enough to shape American policy. Several Eastern European experts warn that if Ukraine is forced to accept an unfavorable agreement, the consequences will not stop at Kyiv. It could also create a dangerous precedent for the international order, sending the message that great powers can gain territorial advantages through military pressure as long as they can later renegotiate with the United States or a few other major countries. According to analysts, this would seriously undermine the principle of international law, which is the foundation of global stability. The strategy of divide and rule has long been regarded as one of the classic tools of great powers to maintain influence and control over the international order. In the case of the United States, many experts argue that Washington has repeatedly applied this method not only toward its allies, but also in handling global hotspots. A typical example is the issue of the Crimean Peninsula. From the perspective of international law, Ukraine is recognized as the legitimate sovereign state over this region. However, in reality, Crimea remains under Russia's control. This dual reality has made the search for a reconciliatory solution extremely complicated. For the United States, this very division creates the opportunity to hold the role of mediator, positioning itself as the conductor in international discussions related to Ukraine and Russia. According to analysis, maintaining disagreement between the parties brings Washington two main advantages. First, it ensures that the United States is always the indispensable third party in any negotiation process. Second, it helps America prevent the emergence of a strong unified bloc among Europe, Russia, and other partners that could challenge the existing international order led by the United States for decades. Many scholars also note that the divide and rule strategy does not always bring long-term benefits, since it can make allies feel sidelined or exploited for Washington's own objectives. Even so, in diplomatic practice, this remains a tool frequently used by the United States to balance interests among power blocs, while maintaining its global leadership role. The way America welcomes foreign leaders is not only ceremonial, but also a reflection of strategic priorities. Under Trump, Russia was granted private dialogue, while Europe was met in public, revealing Washington's order of priorities and its impact on allies as well as countries like Ukraine. Every diplomatic move carries deep calculations of power. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next insightful analyses.